Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to be here with you to talk about um, Youth Action for Birds, our latest leader guide for out-of-school time contexts. And really hopeful that you will find some use in it in your future programs. Definitely want to encourage you as we go along. Feel free to ask questions in the chat window. Flag me down if you want to pause and chat about something as we go along. Thanks again for joining us, and let's go ahead and get started. Okay. So I'm coming to you from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, where our mission is to interpret and conserve the Earth's biological diversity through research, education, and citizen science focused on birds. My name is Kelly Schaefer, and I am the outreach coordinator with the K-12 education team. And here on the K-12 team, we create innovative resources and deliver transformative trainings that empower educators to build young people's science skills through birds, nature, participatory science, and inquiry. Basically, what we do is we create resources and trainings that fall somewhere along these three pillars of nature connection, participatory science, and inquiry investigations. So we are all about getting kids outside and connecting to nature and building science skills. And the resource today that we'll be talking about, Youth Action for Birds, falls more in the first two pillars, nature connection and participatory science. So essentially what we try to do with all of our resources is help students and youth change how they think about science and start to view themselves as scientists. Because if you were to ask a child to do a drawing of a scientist, usually what you get is something like this image here, a guy in a white lab coat with some equations and beakers. Sometimes there's crazy Einstein hair. This guy has a really excellent mustache. And this is science, right? But it is kind of a narrow conception of what science is and who can be scientists. So we really want to help kids start to view these folks as scientists, people who are outside collecting data and answering questions about the natural world, and all the way to this, to viewing themselves as scientists. And so one of the really powerful tools we'll talk about to do that today is participatory science projects like eBird. So my goal for this session is to review the Youth Actions for Birds curriculum. We'll talk a little bit about the creation of it. I will go over kind of the flow of the lessons and what's in the different lessons. And then we'll talk about some of the key tools that are used in these lessons. So we'll focus in on eBird and the Merlin Bird ID app. Feel free to share in the chat window if you've used Merlin before, if you haven't. I will be demoing some things with you today for Merlin. So if you haven't used it before, you'll get a pretty good look at it and some of the latest features. Okay, I see that a lot of folks have used Merlin, so we might not need to spend a lot of time on it. But yes, I'm so glad to see that folks are familiar with this tool. And it is a great tool to use with youth as well, as I'm sure you have had the opportunity to discover. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the history of this curriculum. So here at the K-12 education team with the Cornell, we have been really fortunate to work pretty closely with 4-H for a number of years. We've had several curriculum initiatives throughout the years, which I won't go into depth into, but this latest program from 2020 to now, Engaging Youth with eBird, has been to develop this lesson guide that we're talking about today. And what's really special about this is in our previous lessons that we've used with 4-H have been kind of adapting school lessons for 4-H context, but this time we had the opportunity to create a resource specifically for out-of-school context in collaboration with New York State 4-H. So we worked with 3 different counties to develop the curricula and then, or excuse me, develop the lesson guide, and then we worked with other counties to evaluate it. So we've been creating this in collaboration with 4-H, which is really fun and exciting. So the Engaging Youth with eBird program's goal was to develop this suite of lessons out further. So we have this eBird Explorers suite of lessons for school, for K-12, 3-5, 6-8, and 9-12. And we really wanted to have something that did something similar, but was designed for out-of-school time settings, and to evaluate that and then have that designed and distributed. And so we are now in the distribution phase. We do have a final draft that I will be able to share with you. I just want to give you a heads up that this is not the final accessible form of the PDF. We are working on our final accessibility check so that folks can read it more easily with a screen reader. So this draft that I'll be sharing with you after the webinar might not be that accessible draft just yet, but I'll let you know in the email. We're on that final stage. So what is in this lesson plan? So there are 11 lessons that are 1 hour long. And it's really more like 10 lessons that are 1 hour long, and you'll get to see why later. The 11th lesson is just kind of a placeholder for implementing an action plan, which could take up a different amount of time depending on what you decide to do with the youth you're working with. Each lesson begins with a welcome and connection section, so an opportunity to talk with youth about things related to the topic that they've observed since the last session, just a way to kind of build in a little bit more kind of community building time into it. And then we get into the activities with content for the lesson. When we were developing this with our partners, we came up with 3 main goals. We wanted to have positive youth development incorporated throughout. So you'll see that through the skill building and lifelong interest building. We hope that this lesson guide does, as well as kind of these welcome and connection moments where we're trying to have youth be able to be present with their full selves when they are doing these activities. The other goal we had was youth are scientists, so youth begin to view themselves as scientists, and then nature connections and birds. And within the introduction to these lessons, you'll see these 3 main topics with specific goals written out underneath of it. So just to give you an idea of how it all comes together, let's get into a lesson overview and start here, where I kind of laid out these 3 goals that I mentioned: positive youth development, youth are scientists, and nature connection and birds. And you can sort of see where this is happening throughout the different lessons and how they kind of tie in together. So we try to have these positive youth development moments throughout the lessons. And then we have some lessons that focus more on building science skills, which you can see highlighted with the kind of salmon color, I guess. And then this blue arrow is for nature connections and birds. And really, I feel like you could argue it happens in the earlier lessons too, because they tie into nature and birds, but we get really into it in the later lessons here. So let's dive into the lessons to see kind of what content we're dealing with and how the flow all comes together. So we start out with asking ourselves, who are scientists? And the goal of this lesson is to have youth really understand that science is a set of skills and traits that you can practice and you can build. So we do that through a number of ways. We do the draw scientist activity. So you saw that image of a scientist that a student drew at the beginning of my presentation. And just to kind of really get youth thinking about what do I think a scientist is? What do I think they're doing? What do they look like? Where are they? And then we go into this opportunity to meet scientists. So we have profiles of a really diverse array of scientists who are all working in the natural sciences, so environmental related sciences. Um, and then youth have the opportunity to kind of read about this different work that these scientists are doing and think about the tools that they're doing, and then revisit that drawing they did and think about if they would make any changes to it now that they know a scientist better. So there's 6 different profiles that are featured on a diverse array of scientists. And then we introduce the concept of participatory science. So I've thrown that word out there a lot already. So I want us to take a moment and pause and develop our definition for what participatory science is. And I'm going to go into it in a little bit more depth with you than we do with the youth at this point in the curriculum. So let me throw that question out to you, and please feel free to share your thoughts in the chat window. What is participatory science? Is that a term you've heard of before? Do you know of any projects that are considered participatory science? What do you think the term means? It might also help to share that this is a newer term for what we've called citizen science or community science in the past. So just to kind of give you some little background on this, there was a time when it was known pretty uniformly as citizen science, but a really interesting conversation happened within the community of practitioners about whether the idea of citizen in this context was exclusionary, because it's meant to be for anybody from anywhere, so citizens of the world, but we wanted to make sure that everybody felt they could join it. So we ended up changing the way that we talk about it to being participatory science. You'll still hear me trip up every once in a while and say citizen science, but we are choosing to use the term participatory science now. All right, let's check out some of these great ideas that have come into the chat window. I'm seeing that people are active, engaged in partnership with in a learning environment. Yeah. Participating in science. Yeah, absolutely. Water quality science is a great example of this, taking water samples and monitoring the health of our streams and rivers. eBird is absolutely participatory science. And I'm seeing a definition of the public being able to contribute to science, hands-on for the general population with usable data for scientists. Yes. Project Feeder Watch, Bumblebee Watch. Yes, I love this. This is so exciting for me. There was a time 5 years ago when I asked this question and I would not get these answers. So I love hearing how much you all know about participatory science and citizen science and community science. Yes, so basically, it is an opportunity for folks like you and me and the youth that we work with who might not be professional scientists to participate in science. So to collect data, to share our observations, to help put the pieces of the puzzle together. So folks report their observations using basic scientific protocols to databases that scientists can then use to answer real-world questions. And I love this graphic for thinking about participatory science because it encompasses so many different types of projects, from on the scale of the stars to the microscopic, totally online or totally outside and everything in between, or global versus super local projects. You can find all sorts of different projects along these axes or on these spectrums in citizen science and participatory science. We're, of course, going to focus on bird-focused projects today. But there are other projects out there, and I just want to share these resources with you. So the Association for Advancing the Participatory Sciences is a great place to go to learn more about participatory science. And then scistarter.org is a really great resource for you. If you're interested in looking up different types of projects. So if you want to check out a project on plants or insects or snails, I think there's even one for. There's different projects out there, and you can look them up on SciStarter by the type of project, by the age group, whether you want it online or outside. So great resource for you there. So to sum up, participatory science is a partnership where regular folks like you and me and our youth collect data that scientists then use to answer real-world questions. And whenever I talk about participatory science, I have to pause and share this image. So I want to throw it out to you. What does this image make you think of? What do you think we're looking at here? Looks a lot like light pollution map, doesn't it? But yes, I see a couple of folks are on point here. So yes, in the context of citizen science, you might be able to guess that this map is citizen science observations or participatory science observations. So every point of light on this map is a submission to the eBird database. So there's not really an underlying continental map here. The fact that you can see our world, the shape of our world this well, means there's that many people out there who are observing birds and sharing their observations with us well enough to paint this pretty impressive picture of our world. The closer you look, the more you will notice. You can notice shipping lines down from Tierra del Fuego, from the tip of South America to Antarctica, over to Hawaii. You can start to notice what might be, I don't know, roads or rivers the more you look. It's pretty cool. So there are a lot of impressive and important data points in here. And what that looks like by the numbers is there have been more than 1.7 billion observations submitted to the eBird database by more than 994,000 participants on 125 million checklists from every country in the world, reporting 10,825 species of birds, which is more than 98% of all the species of birds in the entire world. So if you think about what it would take a scientist or a group of scientists to recreate this data set in their lifetime, it's just not possible. Data like this is only possible through participatory science because participatory science is people-powered science. So when we have data like this, we have the power to understand birds on population levels, which helps us understand how they're doing in terms of conservation, for example. So this will come into play later in the lessons, but I just wanted you to have a sense of what it means when I'm talking about the eBird database. I'm talking about this really powerful set of data. I see a great question asking if the volume of data helps account for any data collection issues. Yeah, it does. It does help kind of with what am I trying to say? There's a term that I'm forgetting. I was going to call it noise, but I'm not sure that's the right term. But yes, the more data you have, the less little errors, the less confounding data really starts to matter. Yes, thank you. And the eBird database has a lot of protections going on in the background. So if you are worried about submitting data because you might not be an expert data and the youth you're working with might not be expert birders, there's lots of protections in place. So in the back end of eBird, they actually have filters set up for each location. So if you report a certain number of birds at one time of year, it might be totally normal to see that. Say tree swallows, which are migratory species, and I say I saw 12 in May, that would not get flagged by eBird. If I said I saw 12 in December when they shouldn't be here, that's going to get flagged by eBird as rare. And what that means is they're going to ask me to share more information before I can submit that sighting. And I might even get contacted by an actual person. So there's volunteer reviewers for eBird that will say, hey, can you tell me more about this sighting? It's really unusual for this time of year. So there are lots of protections built into eBird. And there is a really great resource I'll talk about in a moment to help you feel more confident in submitting data to eBird. So participatory science is a really great tool for us as educators and volunteers because it helps us meet our learning goals. So the goals we have for helping our youth build lifelong skills, starting to view themselves as scientists, building connections to nature. And it's a great opportunity to connect to your local environment in a low-cost, year-round activity. And what's motivating for youth in particular is that your data really matters. Your data goes into this database that scientists are using to answer important conservation questions. And you have access to all that data. So you get to poke around in all that data if you want to. It's your data too. So your data matters, and that data is equally available to you as well. All right, so the way that we talk about participatory science with youth is through this video. We don't actually have time, I'm looking at my watch now, to show this video, but I did want to flag it for you because it does use the term citizen scientist. We are hoping to make a new video that will use the term participatory science, but for now it is written into the curriculum, into the lesson, and it does have a little explanation that you can use for talking about the terminology switch to participatory science. So all of the participatory science projects from the Lab of O kind of follow the same protocols. So getting outside, identifying and observing birds, collecting data, entering that data online, and then retrieving and viewing that data online. So there are currently 5 participatory science projects from the lab, but eBird is the one that we focused on for these lessons because eBird is a year-round project, any bird, anytime, anywhere. eBird's motto is that every bird counts. So it's really important in eBird to know about the bird you see every day, the robin, the pigeon, the starling. We want to know those birds because that helps us understand the health of populations. So one of the mottos at the lab is this idea of keeping common birds common. It's a lot easier to keep a bird population healthy than it is to bring one back from the brink of extinction. So even birds that you might think we might not be excited about knowing, we absolutely want to know that robin in the schoolyard, the backyard, or the community library space. So every bird really does count when it comes to eBird. And I am going to let the folks at eBird explain it a little bit better for you and talk a little bit about the impacts that eBird has when it comes to conservation. So let me know if you have any issues with the sound here. I did test it earlier and it seemed like it was working okay. We'll go ahead and play this.
Every day, millions of people around the world enjoy watching birds and recording. In one place.
If we could do this, we would fundamentally transform not just birding, but science and conservation.
From this idea emerged eBird. Put simply, eBird is a way for anyone around the world to store their birding observations, their photos, their sound recordings, and make them available to educators, scientists, and birders. It's incredibly easy to use, and it's incredibly powerful. All you do is let us know where you went birding, when, how far you traveled, and what you saw. It's powerful because hundreds of thousands of people all around the world are doing it, and it's growing. eBird already safeguards 500 million sightings, information that allows all of us to understand the movements and needs of birds at global scales. eBird maintains your lists for you and shares them with other birders from around the world. By sharing, it's now possible for anyone, anywhere, to find your target birds and the best birding hotspots any time of the year. Before eBird, there was no way to comprehensively understand population-level movements of many species. By combining your sightings with remote-sensed habitat data from NASA, we're able to generate species distribution models that provide an unparalleled view of where and when birds are in the landscape. Scientists and students all over the world are now able to use eBird datasets for their research at a variety of spatial scales. These observations help inform better conservation strategies, opening the door to the future of bird conservation. And this is just the beginning. With the help of millions of people who come to eBird each year, we are creating a free, open access system that is easy to use, fun, and rewarding. Rewarding for birders, for scientists, for conservationists, and ultimately the birds themselves. Go to eBird.org or download eBird Mobile to get started, all for free. By joining eBird, you're joining a global team of people that share your passion for birds. Be a part of it.
I don't know if you caught it in that video, but this was filmed in 2017, and Ian shared that eBird safeguarded 500 million observations. So in 2017, we were at 500 million. Now in 2024, we're at 1.7 billion. So eBird really is growing pretty much exponentially in terms of the number of observations that's being submitted, which is really great news for some of these conservation impacts that Ian was talking about. Yeah, Patricia is saying that we are losing a lot of bird species, and that is something that I will talk about here in a moment too. There's a really great study that we reference in these lessons. Okay. So that was eBird in a nutshell, but just to sum up again how you submit data, there are two ways, through the app or through the web platform. So basically you're gonna say where you went birding, how long you were out birding, the date and the time, and what you saw. And what's great about using the app is it tracks the distance and the time for you. So it makes submitting data easier, but if you would prefer to have youth not using the eBird app, we do provide a paper checklist that you can use as well in the lessons. So this is the reference, it's the course I was referencing earlier. This is a great resource for you if you would like some support, feeling more confident submitting to eBird, the eBird Essentials course. It is a free online course. It takes about 2.5 to 3 hours to go through all of it. We do recommend that you go through it before you dive into this if you haven't used eBird before, because we don't go into super depth in the actual lesson write-ups about how to use eBird, because we would be duplicating what's in this really awesome resource. And this will tell you how the data protections work, how the data is used, how you can best submit data to eBird as well. So definitely recommend checking that out. I wanted to make a quick note about submitting data to eBird. However, eBird is not COPA compliant, so users need to be 13 or older to make an account. So for youth younger than that, we recommend you make a group account. So create an email and password that you don't mind sharing with youth so that they can submit data with you. And you'll need to be with them as you're submitting data. And you'll want to make sure that it's a unique email and password, because if you have your own account, that's a single sign-on to everything at the lab. So you don't necessarily want to share that with youth. You want it to be something that you don't mind for, having plugged into an app to submit via eBird. And you also want to make sure that this list is shared with a personal account. Preferably, it would be coming from your personal account and be shared to the group account, but that doesn't always work with teachers. But you just want to make sure it's tied to an account that you are checking the email on, because if eBird has a question about a citing, you want to be able to confer with them. All right, so that is some of the really in-depth background information behind participatory science. In lesson 1, youth just get introduced to the idea of eBird and that they will be submitting to it. And then we start building up the skills that they will need to submit. So the idea behind lesson 2 is that we start thinking about what skills make us good scientists, good participatory scientists. So let me throw this out to you. What are some skills that you think make a good scientist? Curiosity, absolutely. Observation, using all your senses. Yes. Wonder, asking questions. Determination, I love it. I saw 2 determinations come through simultaneously. That's a great one. Yeah, there's a resiliency in science, right? Iteration, because sometimes you'll see that you're going one way and the project or the way that you're collecting data isn't working, so you got to make adjustments on the fly. Love this idea of honesty. Yeah, you need to be as, objective or honest as you can about what you're viewing and keeping great records. Yeah, data quality is important. So I'm noticing some common threads here. So maybe attention to detail, being curious, having that sense of wonder, and being willing to ask questions, being a good observer, using all your senses, having determination and resiliency when it comes to problem solving. Yes, courage to find out you were wrong or correct. Absolutely. One of the things that is so important in science is to recognize that a no sometimes is as important as a yes when you are looking at your hypothesis, right? It's still knowledge, and it's important to report it honestly and look at that data and follow what it's actually telling you. So in this lesson, often when you are doing this activity with youth and brainstorming some scientific skills, observation is one that will come out quite a bit. And so the next part of this lesson is all about actually getting outside and doing some observation. So there's a rainbow hike where you are trying to find the colors of the rainbow. And then there is a sound map. If you haven't done this activity before, I highly recommend it. There's an image here of a young woman doing a sound map. So the way it works is you put an X in the center of your paper. You stand outside and then you try and map around you the sounds that you hear, and you can record them with words or images or symbols. And you're trying to actually map like distance and direction. And what you'll find when you are debriefing with youth is that they will hear things they didn't realize that they could hear. They'll hear a chipmunk running across the ground. They'll hear interesting man-made sounds like a air conditioner ticking and kind of start to realize all the different sounds around them. And then it's a really great opportunity to bring that back to birds. Why is sound important when you're thinking about birds? And so it'll come out that birds sing, and you can actually identify birds by song. So sound is a really important sense to pay attention to when you are bird watching. I feel like the better of a birder I become, the more I am identifying birds by sound, the less often I'm actually seeing them. Kind of a funny, unexpected effect I've been noticing lately. But yeah, sound is a huge part of learning to observe birds. So there's a question about what eBird and whether it accepts sound IDs or sight IDs only. Both, yes. So sight and sound IDs are acceptable in eBird. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the Merlin section. But yes, if you are able to positively identify the bird by sound, you can absolutely report that. All right, so lessons 3 through 7 are all about building bird ID skills. I'm going to dive into these in more depth, but I just wanted you to kind of see that flow. So now we have this idea of who scientists are, that nature observations and answering questions about nature is science. You can join that through participatory science, and you can build science skills like observation. Now we start to use those observation skills to build specifically bird identification skills. So Peter's asking about the last activity, the rainbow hike. Yes, that challenges them to find the colors of the rainbow in their own environment. That is, yep, that's it exactly. Okay, so let's dive into these lessons a little bit. They rely on Merlin, so I want to introduce you to that before we go too much further. And I'm going to try to be a little sneaky here. We'll see if I can get this to work. It doesn't always. So I'm going to try and project my phone screen and actually demonstrate Merlin for you. If you have Merlin, you might want to play along. It's a pretty fun tool, and we'll have the opportunity to practice a couple things with it. So while we're waiting for this to see if it will load properly, Merlin has several ways to identify birds. There are 4 main ways. The first is through a step-by-step bird ID, answering 5 simple questions. And the next is through photo ID. If you're lucky enough to get a photo of a bird on your phone, there's some computer visioning that Merlin uses that can help you identify birds. There's also a sound ID function and the explore birds function, which works a whole lot like, yes, all right. It works a whole lot like a field guide, but has some really cool functionality that field guides don't. So let me get out of this for a second. So hopefully right now you're seeing a picture of 2 birds on my screen. If you know what they are, don't tell us. And in just a moment, you should also be able to see my Merlin screen. Somebody give me a thumbs up if you're seeing that in the chat window. All right, awesome, fantastic. Thank you so much. All right, so Merlin has recently gotten an update. So if you haven't opened it in a while, it might look new to you. What you will see is there's a bird of the day now. Today we're featuring the eastern towhee, great bird, love this bird. And then it has the three main ways to identify birds picked out here. So we have our step-by-step ID, which I mentioned, the sound ID and the photo ID. We're going to go ahead and test the step-by-step ID, and we're going to work on identifying the bird on the screen here. If you are playing along with Merlin, you can go ahead and say your current location, just because this bird is seen across the US. And then you want to say, when did you see the bird? You can go ahead and say today, and we'll hit next. And now is the tricky part. We're getting into what size is the bird. Merlin uses a scale of birds to help you determine size, because size is actually a key clue to bird identification. So we have sparrow, robin, crow, and goose, and the spots in between. So it's hard to judge size from a picture, but we have this bird perched on a barbed wire, so I can roughly guess size. I'll go ahead and say about robin size, and I'll hit next. Then you can choose up to 3 main colors that you see on the bird. So if I'm looking here, I'm seeing kind of this buff brown color. I see some black in the spots. And I could put a third color, but I don't really feel like I have to. It feels like that's a pretty decent, oh, I said gray. Yeah, we'll say black. And then we'll hit next. And this is getting at another clue to bird ID, which is habitat and behavior. Was it eating at a feeder, swimming or wading, on the ground, in trees or bushes, on a fence or wire, soaring or flying? And ours is on a wire. And so then we'll hit next. And it's going to come up with a list of maybe 10 or so birds that you could see that match this description. So the first bird we have is a meadowlark. I always recommend you're going to look for 3 points of commonality at least. And first we see a big no with that bright yellow belly, but sometimes females look different. So if you scroll, you can look at different pictures. It's just not looking right to me. Again, American robin, black head, orange belly, male and female look the same, so that doesn't look right to me. Red-winged blackbird, male and female look different, but again, the color's not right, the shape of the beak isn't right. And we can start to see that some of these other ones, same deal, beak is wrong, color's wrong. And then we scroll down, we get to this bird here, the mourning dove. And now we can start to see some of those points of agreement, right? That overall buffy color, the black spots on the wing, the darker kind of grayish brown wing feathers and tail feathers here, and those cute little pink feet. So this is our bird. This is the mourning dove. And if I wanted to have more information, if I wasn't sure, I could click this eye here. That's going to bring me a nice description of the mourning dove. It's going to let me play some sounds so we can hear what it sounds like. Not sure if that came through. You were able to hear that? It sounds pretty mournful, like it's crying. That's where the name mourning dove comes from. And then you can see the range. And then you could say, this is my bird. And depending on how you have Merlin set up, it'll either add it to your Merlin life list, or it might even open eBird up for you. So you could start an eBird checklist. All right, so that is one way to use Merlin. I'm not going to go, actually, we'll just close that X here. I'm not going to go over photo ID because I find that to be a lot harder to use in the field. It's just hard to get a photo of a bird. But it is similarly, it'll pop up the same kind of list of birds that you can scroll through and see if you find a match. But I do want to take a moment to demonstrate the sound for you. So as soon as I hit this green button, it will start recording sound. And I'll talk a little bit over it just so you can see the screen and what it looks like. So right now you're seeing a spectrogram of my voice. So spectrogram is the visualization of the sound. If Merlin were hearing a bird, there would be a little blue dot that would show up just here under the spectrogram. So you would know it's hearing something that it thinks is a bird and can ID. And then the name will pop up right down here. And then if it hears that bird again, over time, every time it hears the bird, that name will light up. So I'm going to go ahead and play a sound here, and we'll see if Merlin can identify it, and keep your eye out for those two features I talked about, the blue dot and the name lighting up. Okay, so we had our Blue Jay name pop up and it lit up several times. One thing to note, and you'll get this notification if you use the Merlin app sometimes, is if you're using Merlin for Sound ID, it will sometimes throw a wacky thing out there that you're probably not actually hearing. I went birding this week and I love to run it while I'm birding because I like to see what I hear that Merlin doesn't, and vice versa. And it definitely pulled up a couple things. I was like, that's not really here. So it's always a good idea to get your eyes on the bird if you can. This is like a starting point. If you can't get your eyes on the bird, the next best thing is going to be to compare what you recorded or what you were hearing live to the sound of the bird. So if I were to click on this here, this Blue Jay name, it's going to go to the part of the recording where it heard it. So I should be able to hit play. And hear the bird again. And then I should be able to come to the Blue Jay and hit play. And hear a couple different varieties of calls and see if it matches. And then from there, that matched really well for me. I would feel pretty comfortable saying, yeah, that was a Blue Jay. I'm going to delete this because obviously this is not an accurate recording from today. But yeah, that's Sound ID in a nutshell for you. Then the other really important thing I want you to know is about this explore function. So right now, my Merlin is set to show all of the birds that I have downloaded, which is all the species for the US and Canada. But you can have it be a birding buddy for you. So if you go to that upper right-hand menu right here and select likely birds, and then you can choose a location. I'll do my current location. You can choose a date. I like to switch here to most likely. So you're going to go likely birds for your date and location, most likely, and hit show 219 birds. Now it is going to show a list of birds that you would be most likely to see if you were to walk out right now and do a bird count. And I can tell you right now, I've heard the top 4 or 5 already today. So this is a really great tool for you to use. You can help pick out birds for your students or the youth you're working with to learn before you go outside. If say I knew I was going to be doing this in January instead, I'm like planning for a specific time frame, I can change my date to be in January, and it is going to adjust the list of birds for that. And so now we have a slightly different list of birds here. So this can be a great tool for you to plan ahead. All right, so that is Merlin in a nutshell. We're gonna jump back into our slides here. And we're gonna skip this because we already did our mystery bird. And now we're gonna talk a little bit more about how the lessons make use of the tool Merlin to help learn about birds. So lesson 3 is introducing birds, getting into just the nitty-gritty of what birds are and what makes them special. And we start out by talking about what we already know about birds, playing a true or false game that you can make really fun and active by having, 2 different sides of the room and youth running from one side to the other, depending on their answer. That gets at some of these cool facts about birds, like laying hard-shelled eggs and what sort of things they eat, and helps you also gauge the background knowledge of the youth you're working with. We also introduce you to 4 common local birds, and that would be these guys right here from the Merlin size scale: the house sparrow, the American robin, American crow, and Canada goose. And once you get to know those birds, you start diving into some really cool, important clues to bird ID, which is size and shape. Again, that scale that we looked at is a really important part of identifying birds, and it's actually the first clue to bird ID, even over color. And then we use that function I just showed you on Merlin, where you learn your most likely birds at the moment, to make a local bird bingo card. So youth are drawing the birds, putting them on their own special location on the bird bingo card. And it's a really great way to get to know some of the birds they might see in their area. Then we get to get outside, play bingo, use that card. And then we start diving into why participatory science is important. So we have some of these conservation stories and about how eBird data makes a difference and really helps. I saw something come through the chat window talking about when you're talking about big conservation challenges, you have to have a message of hope. And I totally agree with that. And that's what this article does. It provides some of the why eBird data matters piece, and why your data and submitting to participatory science is a great thing to do. Then we dive into some of the more in-depth bird ID tools, like field marks. So field marks are things that you can identify in the field to help you identify a bird. So if we're looking at this illustration of a house sparrow, we'll notice it has a black chin and bib, a white wing bar, and an overall brownish body, and those would be considered field marks. We also play a game called Red Plover, which is a play on the Red Rover game title, and involves learning the bird body parts. And then we dive into a focus bird and actually doing our first practice participatory science walk. You can submit this, or you can just use it as an opportunity to practice identifying birds as a group. So a focus bird, though, I should have defined that better, is each youth gets assigned a bird from your list of common birds to get to know really well, to draw, to write facts about, depending on the age of the kids you're working with. And you can make your own club or group field guide of birds that you might see when you're out and about in your area. Then we start to get into habitat. So the next 2 lessons dive into habitat and have some fun games to do it, but we also get outside and do a habitat inventory of your meeting area. So we're looking for those 4 important core parts of habitat: food, cover, water, and space. And thinking about, what is your habitat missing? What could you add to it that would make it a better habitat? And then starting to talk about adaptations. So how are bird bodies and behaviors designed to help them survive in their habitats? And then you get to design your own bird in a wacky habitat. It's a super fun game. First, you design a really harsh imaginary habitat, and then you switch your habitat with another group, and they have to design a bird to live in that habitat. And it can be as fantastical or as realistic as you choose to guide them to create. Lesson 9 starts focusing in on local habitats and is super fun because it's when you start getting into eBird data. So I'm going to actually take a moment here just to show you how to use this part of eBird. So if you come to the eBird website, this part of the lesson has you using the explore function and then coming down to either explore your region or explore your hotspots. So I'm going to go to explore region and I'm going to put in my county and I'm going to spell it correctly even. And this is going to come up with all of the species seen in my county this month, but you're going to want to come up to this map section here. If you click that, now you're going to see all of the hotspots around. And this is a great opportunity to compare some different habitats. So if I were to pull up the list for Stewart Park, so I'm going to click here and I'm going to click view details, and I'm actually going to open this in a new tab. So this is going to load, theoretically, sorry, my internet's being a little slow, a list of birds seen at this location. Stewart Park is cool because it's right on the tip of Cayuga Lake and has some forest. So it's a really cool habitat. I'm going to hit all new species, and then I'm going to come here and hit last observed. And this is going to tell me what was most recently seen in Stewart Park. And you can see that there's, a long-tailed duck. That's unusual for this time of year. But it's going to see that there's a lot of water birds. And then we start getting some forest birds, but we can see how that is really related to the type of habitat. Whereas if we come back to our hotspot here and we pick a different habitat, let's pick something that is more foresty, let's say. Let's do the Cornell Botanic Gardens. We'll hit view details, go through that same sort of thing. All new species, last observed. We can start to see, we do still have Canada geese, but we don't have that same amount of water ducks. We have a lot of more forest species coming in. And so this is a really great opportunity for youth to identify different habitats in your county, or if you need to go broader to get enough different habitat types, and make predictions about what are they going to see there that's different, and then use eBird data to see if their predictions are correct. And so that's the point of that lesson there. All right. We are just at time, so I'm going to rush through these last 2. If you have questions, please start putting them in the chat window, and I will come back to this at the end if there's more time. But I want you to know that the next 2 lessons, for some reason, one of the slides is not showing up. Apologies for that. There's a lesson 10, which actually this is lesson 10. That's the issue. Okay. This is a typo. This should be lesson 10. Gets into the power of eBird. So it shows a really amazing migration model that uses eBird data and helps youth understand some of the really incredible ways eBird data is applied. Then we get into how participatory science and conservation are related. And then this is the really important part, creating an action project plan. And we do provide several ideas and examples here for you, but we encourage you to think of something that you can do with your youth. Yeah, so I do see the question coming. How are you going to get a copy of the curriculum? I'm going to send a follow-up email to everybody who registered. It's going to have the recording of this webinar, and it will have a link to the curriculum as well. I'm just trying to give my team another hour to get that accessible version done. But I'll send it as soon as the recording is up, which should be no later than Friday. I should be able to get you all of this stuff, including the links to things I mentioned today. If you have time to stick around, I'll take another 2 minutes just to go through the 3 Billion Birds project. As somebody mentioned earlier, there was a really important study that came out, and this would have been, I want to say 2019, that was looking at the total number of birds in the US and Canada. So not just any one species, but all birds together, and found that since 1970, we have lost 2.9 billion birds, which is a pretty staggering number and can be kind of overwhelming and difficult to understand what that number really means. So what it comes down to is 1 in 4 birds gone since 1970. When we look at specific groups of birds, we're seeing changes like this across many groups of birds, including grassland and boreal birds. So meadowlarks, we've lost 3 and 4. Even in grosbeaks, we've lost 9 and 10. And so when you see things like this, it really brings home that there's something going on in our ecosystems that mean it's not able to support birds in the same way it used to. We're seeing similar drops in insects, which makes a lot of sense. But when we talk about things like this with youth, I don't go this in depth into it with youth in the lessons, but when we talk about this with youth, it's really important to have that message of hope. So here's what came through in that study as well. 3 groups of birds were doing a lot better since 1970. Raptors, waterfowl, and woodpeckers. And the things that they have in the thing they have in common is conservation. We put conservation effort into all of these species. We banned DDT, we protected wetlands, we changed the way we manage forests, and we saw an increase in those birds as a result. So we know that when we know there is an issue and we choose to do something about it, we are able to make change. And the cool thing that came out of this study was 3billionbirds.org, which is a really great resource for talking about ways that you can help birds. So in this lesson, we actually have youth visit that site. They check out the 7 simple actions. And then there's a separate part of the website that's really great that they check out, which is what the benefits of birds and what ecosystem services and things do birds provide? How are they important to us? And so you have youth review these 2 sections and then think about how they want to help birds in their community. We suggest things like you can lead community bird walks. You can create social media posts. You can plant native plants at a community center. So there's a whole different variety of things that you can do. And I wanted to just point out that these 7 simple actions that came out from that 3 Billion Birds project, one of the ones is doing participatory or citizen science. So just by submitting that data, it's really important because it was actually citizen science data from the Christmas bird count that was the data that was used in this study that helped us know these trends were happening. And so eBird data and other participatory science data like it is going to be what tells us when we've reversed the trend and things are looking better. And then, as I said, lesson 11 is really just a placeholder for you to think about project implementation and then how and provide some suggestions for how you could reflect and celebrate at the end. That is the curriculum in a nutshell. I'm sorry I went over. Thanks for hanging out for a few extra minutes. Let me just check back in the chat window and see if there are any additional questions that came in. Do want to say thank you so much for joining us. Please feel free to stay in touch. You can always email us at k12lab@cornell.edu. I'm seeing that Chantel was saying that birds are a great opportunity to talk about how you can develop technology and AI tools or augmented intelligent tools to solve everyday problems. I love that too. So for folks who aren't like super into birds, they might be into the technology aspect of Merlin or eBird. And so you can have kind of these dual ways into this program and getting excited about these tools and getting excited about birds. I see Patricia is asking if eBird is keeping up with name changes. Yes, eBird does a taxonomic update every year, and it's a big deal at the lab. Everybody is very tired until it's done. So they do update the taxonomy and with name changes every year. And we'll be changing the names probably in line with the Bird Names for Birds initiative, if that's also what you were thinking. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming. I'm hanging out for a couple more minutes if you have more questions. Otherwise, please look for that email. I'll be sure to send you this resource. And yeah, really excited to have this out there, and I hope you will enjoy using it with youth.